But today we're going to be talking about universal design and universal design for learning. And so the idea of universal design is that something, whether it's a building, a curriculum, a lesson, a tool, is designed from the outset to be the most useful for the most people, to be the most accessible to the broadest range of people. For example, the image here on the screen, which is that of a elegant looking spiral ramp that is leading from the ground level of a building, which is probably the entryway or a foyer, into the second level. And what you might notice is that there are no stairs, and there is also doesn't appear to be an elevator, at least prominently displayed. And the idea here is that as many people as possible would be able to use this ramp, whether there was somebody who was using a wheelchair or a motorized wheelchair or walking or pushing a stroller or using a cane, that it would be the most inviting to the broadest range of people. I'm sure in this building there are other access means, but here the focal point is not a grand staircase or a bank of elevators, but rather this ramp that kind of welcomes everyone. And universal design, when we think about it, well, it's really helpful to understand really some kind of foundations of disability theory and some different ways of theorizing disability. So there are the traditional or medicalized views of disability. Those of you in education or special education have probably heard the term the deficit model, the medical model. They're essentially the same thing. This is where the disability is viewed as a problem with the person, that a disability needs to be fixed, as something to be fixed, that we can rely on professionals to provide a cure or fix the person with a disability. And it's from these kinds of understandings of disability, these traditional or medicalized or deficit understandings of disability, where we have these ideas of overcoming narratives you might have heard, where it's just so amazing that somebody with a disability was able to participate in a marathon or race or do something that wouldn't be remarkable for someone else without a disability. The idea being that because there's something wrong with this person, they've been able to overcome this. So in this medicalized or deficit model of disability, there is almost like the assumption that disability isn't really considered, or varying ranges of ability aren't considered when building something. So in this image, we have a picture of a person who's using a wheelchair, who's trying to, looks like access a building or come up from a parking lot into a building. And the only means of doing that is by a staircase. And so there is a barrier that is in their place. There are also social and political understandings of disability. The social model is probably the form of this that is most widely known. The social model being that a person's impairment and their disability are not the same thing, and that the disability is something that is caused by society's understanding or misunderstanding of disability. So in these views, disability is neutral or positive. You might have heard of disability identity, disability pride. The barriers are constructed, are socially constructed and primarily exist in the environment. So an example I like to use a lot for that is about my father. My father was blind. Unfortunately, he passed away a few months ago, but he lost his sight due to glaucoma when I was an infant. So I never knew him as a person who wasn't blind, and he lived his entire life. He was 22 and he lost his sight, and he died in his 70s. But his impairment was that he couldn't see, that his eyes didn't function the way that other people's mind, like mine, for example. What was disabling about that was existing in a society that didn't make provisions or accommodate or have space for a person who was blind. That might be getting on a bus and there not being an audible announcement of what the bus was, what the number of the bus was, or where it was going, or even a bus driver who would indicate that. It might be going up to a bank of elevators and they're not being braille indicating the numbers. It might be not being able to get books in a format that was accessible to him. Those are largely political, social, cultural, attitudinal barriers, but not things that were caused by him being blind. These views also hold that disability is a part of the human experience. You might have heard some people say that we're all only temporarily abled. People age, people have accidents, people have health issues that might change how their bodies function. I'll use myself as an example. I'm 52 years old. I have early onset, excuse me, early onset arthritis. I've already had a hip replacement 3 years ago. I had to have my right hip replaced. Because it got to the point where I couldn't walk on it. Unfortunately, my left hip is now acting up. I'm moving much more slowly than I had previously. I'm not able to participate in some of the things that I like to do. I can't walk my dogs, at least as briskly as they probably need. I've had to curtail some of my activities like mountain biking, things that I like to do. This fatigues me to be walking around on this. And so I am experiencing a change in my ability based on, something that's wasn't an issue previously in my life. Um, I will have surgery to correct this, but my eyes will also change. My hearing will also change. Um, God forbid I could be in a car accident. And so I think that there is this idea that, by exceptionalizing disability and kind of viewing this as a problem with the individual, like in the deficit medicalized views, that it's kind of ignoring the fact that it is a naturally occurring part of the human experience. Um, and a primary goal in these approaches is to change the environment to reduce barriers and not so much a focus on changing the person. Again, in some previous designs, and I should also say ways of thinking, some are denied. This is kind of it's an interesting little comic here where there's a group of kids waiting to get into a school building. There's an individual out shoveling the snow. Um, uh, and the person in a wheelchair is saying, could you please shovel the ramp? And the person doing the shoveling saying, all these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, I'll clear the ramp for you. And I think the obvious irony is this is that when the stairs are shoveled off, not everybody's going to be able to use them. But when the ramp is shoveled off, everyone would be able to use it. So shoveling the ramp would actually make the building accessible for everyone who's pictured here, whereas shoveling the steps doesn't. So I see lots of examples of this, and you probably will too. And I kind of have posted in a discussion an opportunity for you to share examples of universal design that you've encountered. You might also share some examples of places where universal design could be or isn't working as intended. A favorite example of mine is where you see, I've seen this in many places. Most recently, I saw it at the faculty commons in the Bird Library on the 5th floor, where there's a push button for to operate the power door. And the push button has been placed appropriately. I'm sure it's meeting ADA requirements as far as code requirements, as far as its placement. You can, somebody be able to push it and have the door, which is kind of heavy, swing open. But what they've done is somebody has arranged the furniture in such a way that there's a desk right in front of the button. So if I walk up to it, I can reach my hand over the desk, hit the button. If I were wheeling in a wheelchair, I wouldn't be able to get close enough to hit the button. So it's kind of it's more of a attitudinal or perspective that somebody just isn't thinking about what would be most accessible. So even though there is this button that would be great, it hasn't been used. I've seen situations where a trash can has been placed right there. It's very convenient for the person who's emptying the trash to be able to just pop the door open and grab the trash can. Problem is that it then makes that door inaccessible and undoes or short circuits the placement of the accessibility button. So where do we find UD? A very common examples. You'll probably hear me say this several times over the session, is, curb cuts. And in some of our readings, there'll be references to digital curb cuts. And so curb cut has kind of become a shorthand for universal design. What is a curb cut? Well, one is pictured here in this image. It's an image of a street corner where there's a sidewalk, and you can see in this image where a portion of the sidewalk, it looks like it's been recently redone. The cement looks newer, and instead of there being a well-defined curb that might be 4 or 5 inches high, separating the sidewalk from the street, the sidewalk gradually flows down into the street. You'll also note in the picture that there is a rectangular portion of the curb that looks like it's got patterns of raised knobs on it that will provide a couple of features. So this is a curb cut. Curb cuts were designed initially to ensure that people who are using wheelchairs would be able to roll off the sidewalk, be able to cross the street and roll onto a sidewalk without having to hop a curve. Um, some of the lore around this, and I've experienced this and noticed this with folks I've been with, is that if there's a curb cut that is a very nice gradual slope into the street, and there's nothing else to indicate that the sidewalk is ending and the street is beginning, someone who might be using a cane to wayfind because they're visually impaired might just walk in the street without realizing it. Also, walking down a incline might be slippery if it's wet, or if, for say in Syracuse, there's snow, something like that. So then a retrofit to the retrofit. So the sidewalk was retrofitted with a curb cut. The curb cut was retrofitted with this kind of plastic or composite rectangle that provides a tactile reference point to indicate that sidewalk is ending, the street is beginning, also provides some traction, things like that. Where else do we find universal design? Captioning. It's interesting, even, in the time that I've been teaching this class, captioning has gone from being still kind of a fringe, not widely available thing to I see people using captioning all the time. Think about places where you might see things captioned. I'm going to be in an airport tomorrow. They'll have TVs running around the gates. Sometimes they'll have the sound on. Sometimes I won't even have the sound on. They'll just have the captioning running. Places like at the gym. I often, almost anymore when I'm watching something on my phone or on my computer, I just turn the captioning on in case I miss what some of the audio is, or I'm in a loud environment and can't hear it, or I'm in a more public space and I don't want to have the volume blaring. So captioning, which actually was originally developed for people with hearing impairments, has more broadly become a benefit to a wider range of people. People with other disabilities, maybe it helps them to be reading for comprehension. It might be environmental differences. So captioning really helps. Easy grip tools like the OXO tools that you can get at Target or Walmart. Large grip tools, easy grip. Actually, I should have brought it out at my in-laws' place here. There is an OXO can opener. I actually had never seen one in person before. Um, I guess I should probably pause and run and go get it, but I'm not going to. Just a handheld device that helps people open jars and things like electric doors, like the doors I was just previously mentioning. Um, Again, very useful for someone and almost maybe necessary for someone who can't reach the handle or is using a wheelchair and is unable to navigate the chair to be able to open the door, but is also broadly useful. I can say right now, with someone with a painful hip, it's hard for me sometimes to actually keep my balance to pull open a door. So it's nice just to be able to push a button. So these are just a few examples of where we find universal design. And often when we're talking about universal design, we do use these physical built environment examples. One, because universal design grew out of the architectural field and dealing with the built environment, but also because that is where the broadest range of people encounter it. In a recognizable way in their everyday life, even if they've had a class or been through schooling where there has been universal design of instruction or universal design of learning, it's maybe not quite as recognizable. Okay, well, I had to pause because somebody was asking me a question. And so I took that moment to ask my son to bring me the jar opener out of the drawer here at my in-laws house. I'm going to hold it up here and I'm going to describe it as well. It is a very simple tool. It's has a handle on one end. This is an OXO or OXO brand. So if you've seen those at Walmart or Target or whatever, it is exactly like all the ones you've seen. Has a nice wide grip that people can handle pretty easily. It has some rubberized grips, so that you can get a good purchase on it. It's wider, it's broader, so it's less strain to grasp it. And then the other part of it is this, I guess I'd call it a triangular shaped piece of metal. And on the inside of it, there are one side of it has teeth, and the other side is smooth. And you just slide this onto a bottle cap or a lid or a jar lid, and then you have more leverage to turn it. Again, this is a mass market tool. I am willing to bet that my in-laws got this at Walmart or Target or someplace like that. My mother-in-law actually was telling me the other night that she uses it to open gallons of milk. All right. Just make sure I am actually recording. So what are some universal design principles? Well, the idea here is that universal design, designing something for the broadest range of people, designing with accessibility in mind from the outset, is that it's not an afterthought, right? That we consider full access, full accessibility from the outset. Because of this, it is fairly widely considered that making something accessible from the outset is more cost effective than retrofitting. Retrofitting. A retrofit is going back and fixing something. So, for example, one of the first slides I showed you had that building with the very elegant spiral shaped ramp in the middle. Building that is going to be cheaper than building a building that doesn't have access and then having to go back and put it in. And it's usually more elegant and easy to use because it has been designed that way. It hasn't been tacked on. In my first university position, I was at North Carolina State University. The accessible entrance to the School of Education, the college education actually there, was basically through the loading bay area. So if you could take the stairs into the building, and this was a building that was built in 1972, it was built the same year I was. But this building, if you wanted to, if you could, wanted to go in the building and you could climb the stairs, you walked into a grand foyer where there was, all the, signs and posters and the various things that you might find on display in an academic building, heralding the successes of the students and faculty, signs pointing you to the dean's office, things like that. If you have to use a wheelchair or use the accessible entrance, you go in, you roll through this kind of dark entry through this back parking lot by the dumpsters into the lowest level of the building that is nondescript as a basement, actually, and have to go to the elevator that will get you to that foyer. So it's had that building actually been designed where there was an accessible entrance or where the main entrance was accessible, it would have been both more cost effective than retrofitting that building and also just elegant and easy to use. So Ron Mace, who is broadly considered to be the father of universal design, who, by the way, was a professor at North Carolina State University in a building almost practically across the street from this inaccessible school of education. A quote from him here says, "Consider the needs of the broadest range of users from the beginning." And so I think if we were talking about universal design for learning, we could just change users to learners and say, consider the needs of the broadest range of learners from the beginning. So here we have some principles of universal design. I am not going to go through all of these in great depth and detail. I'm just going to kind of mention what these principles are. Things: equitable use, tolerance for error, flexibility in use, things like low physical error. I'll point out that one. You'll notice that it's a lever doorknob. I live in a 115-year-old house. All the doorknobs actually in the house are decorative and round. Most of them are brass. They're difficult to use. They're difficult to grasp. They're impossible to grasp If, say, in the middle of a Syracuse winter, you put hand lotion on, it would be a lot easier to have one of these lever doorknobs. Things like simple and intuitive use, making sure that someone can see it and figure out what it would be used for. I did have to ask what this bottle opener was when the first time I saw it, but when somebody said it's a bottle opener or a jar opener, I immediately understood how it'd be used. No one had to explain how to use it to me. Perceptible information that again, kind of, that it relates how it's supposed to be used, and that also the person using it can get the information from it. And size and space for appropriate use. Think about my example of the trash can in front of the accessibility button. I think I left off tolerance for error, which is an important one, particularly in thinking about more educational contexts and thinking about how a student, for example, might make a mistake and need to be able to navigate back in a learning environment to something. But these are all examples in this little poster here of universal design in the built environment. But if you, again, read through these, and they're all also in the readings, mentioned the readings for today. You can also just be thinking about a lot of these things in terms of what would this look like in a learning environment, if that is your interest. So this leads us to universal design in education. I call it the alphabet soup because there are a number of different acronyms. The most common one is UDL, Universal Design for Learning. There's also Universal Instructional Design, which is UID, or UDI, which is Universally Designed Instruction. These are all kind of different, but the same. And we're thinking about things like instruction and curriculum. And what I would say is the most important thing is this is about making teaching and learning accessible and available to all learners. And there's a dog in the background. So these ideas from universal design were kind of latched onto by folks in education, particularly at CAST. So universal design ideas have been imported into this notion of universal design for learning. So universal design for learning is an approach that addresses the what, the why, and the how of learning. We're going to go into a little bit more detail about that. So there are kind of several ways of kind of approaching and thinking about universal design of learning. So I'm talking about the what, the how, and the why of learning. So recognition networks, strategic networks, and affective networks, kind of how we gather facts, how we read, see, hear, how we apprehend what we're learning, the how things happen, how we plan and perform and organize tasks, how we plan and perform tasks, how we organize our ideas. And then affective, the why. Why are we motivated to do this? How are we motivated, and how are we engaged? How do we stay engaged? How do we keep people engaged and motivated? So one of these questions then is providing multiple means of representation. Since all students perceive and comprehend information differently, there's no single way of representing information that will meet all the needs of all students. So again, this is rather than just giving someone something to read or writing it on a chalkboard or dry erase board, whatever it might be, what are multiple means of representation? So there's a discussion question that asks you to think about what are some ways to provide multiple means of representation of information and content. Providing multiple means of action and expression. This is a way of saying, how can students navigate a learning environment and express what they know? How can they engage, and how can they, navigate, and then also how can they show you what they've learned and talk about what they've learned? Is it just a multiple choice test, or are there a variety of ways that they can show what they've learned and how they can express their learning? Again, I've got a discussion question. It's in Blackboard. What are some ways to provide multiple means of action and expression to provide a variety of ways for students to demonstrate what they have learned? And then finally, multiple means of engagement. Thinking about how students can get engaged and stay motivated. So students do differ in the ways in which they learn and can be engaged or motivated. And so again, have a different question. What are some ways to provide multiple means of engagement to keep students motivated and interested? Now, I want to kind of make a distinction here, and I don't have a slide about it, but I do want to say that universal design for learning is not multiple intelligences. This is not learner preferences. And so I don't want this, I don't want to hear people saying like, well, you know, people are an auditory learner, or, I'm a kinesthetic learner. That is different than making sure that things are accessible and making sure that there are, even if it is multiple means of action and expression, or multiple means or different ways of engagement, and different modes of representation. These are not about catering to someone's self-identified learning preferences. So I want to be sure that we make a distinction there. It may be the fact that I prefer to learn visually, but that is very different than if I have a learning disability and all a generalized language print disability, written expression disability, and everything is provided in writing to me. That is different than, oh, Alan, the university professor who has a PhD, prefers to hear things as opposed to read them. That's different. All right. So let's make sure that you are not kind of falling into some Howard Gardner-esque kind of language. I do think that there is a place for, providing students an opportunity to interact and engage in ways that feel best for them. But this is about providing access. This is about thinking about ability, disability, and making sure that we are not putting barriers in a learner's place, in a learner's way. So what are a few strategies on UDL? Well, obviously, um, maybe having a video of class, doing some captioning, having captioned the video. I have a little captioned example of me watching one of my favorite anime shows, King of the Hill. Fun fact, I was born in Texas, grew up in Oklahoma. King of the Hill resonates with me. But again, an example of something I now watch captioned, even though I've probably seen every episode of King of the Hill twice. Um, Chances to move around. Again, this is not because somebody is kinesthetic, a kinesthetic learner is self-identified, but perhaps it's a way for someone who has a learning disability and would feel more comfortable in a different position. Or somebody who has a physical disability and needs to be in a different place, right? Chance to move around. Outlining and checking in at the beginning of each class. I didn't do a very good job of that here. Providing lecture notes, slides online. Recording a narration on a PowerPoint, using dictation, using voice to speech for creating class notes. I'm going to upload this video to YouTube. YouTube's going to generate an auto caption that captions. Those captions could actually be downloaded as a transcript. That transcript could be read. It's quite possible that someone could not watch this video at all and just download the auto transcript that YouTube generates. Probably pretty good, not great, but not perfect, I should say, but probably pretty good. Doing some podcasting, creating audio lectures or notes. A favorite activity of some of my colleagues is having just a note-taking assignment where different students, where everyone like collaboratively takes notes. That does several things. It um, it gives everyone an opportunity to participate in class in ways that maybe they're not focusing on taking notes. It also has provides the opportunity for notes to be generated in different ways. I like to joke that I would not take these notes pictured here where it says strategic and motor networks. I would have interesting images and drawn little clouds and shapes. I would have written bulleted notes, but I probably actually engage with this better visually, and just my um, my own reading style, how I process information, that'll be more helpful for me. And this person has probably captured different information as well. So I know I'm kind of bordering very closely on preferences there, but um, having a big page, a long list of text, it often does not work very well for me. It also, not just from the having the notes aspect, but it also makes sure that someone who might struggle actually with the physical or cognitive task of writing isn't struggling to generate documentation of a class that they might otherwise need. So this was kind of a quick video and a quick run through of universal design and universal design for learning. I will be talking more about this throughout the semester, but wanted to, or excuse me, not the semester, but the Maymester session, but I wanted to at least touch on it and cover some of the concepts here today. As always, I hope that the Maymester is going well for you, and please don't hesitate to email me if you have any questions. I would ask, and I'm going to make an announcement in Blackboard to this, is your chances of hearing back from me are much better, and hearing back from me sooner are much better if you will email me directly using an email client, Gmail, Outlook, whatever, rather than sending me an email through Blackboard. Because I might not check in for Blackboard for several hours. You've messaged me in Blackboard, whereas if you email me, I'll almost certainly see it pretty quickly on my phone. I don't get those messages. So I would appreciate it if rather than sending me a Blackboard message, that you just email me directly. All right, thanks. Again, my ambition is to have a video tomorrow, but my reality is I probably won't. You will probably see and hear from me again on Thursday. All right, have a good rest of your Tuesday.